Drug Tone Audio. Check it out.
Lovers and haters, friends and enemies, welcome to Sends and Suffers Podcast. I am your host, Mario Stanley. I cannot tell you how much doing this LGBTQ plus series with Alexa has been a growth experience. This episode you're about to hear is Alexa and I kind of recapping and talking about what we've learned, how we've grown, and how this whole experience has been together. And it has taught me a lot. And you're going to hear us both talk about some moments that were great, not so great. And we're also going to take a moment to talk to Alexa and recap on some of the highlighted moments that stood out the most for her. I hope you all have enjoyed this series as much as I have. And I look forward to doing the next series with her this next coming summer. Sit back, enjoy, and listen to two people build a relationship together. All right. Alexa, how are we today?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Mario?
I'm all right. It's been a long 48 hours, but with Worlds happening and everything going on in the gym right now, it's a little cray, but it's good. It's good. So I guess we should just get right into it. How has it been being the host of your own podcast?
It's been an amazing experience, and I've definitely learned so much through the experience, and totally changed overall as a person and a climber, and just really, really grateful for the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun.
So I know I'm psyched, and you're welcome, and I'm happy, and I look forward to doing this again. I know this has definitely been a big learning curve for me and as well. And I'm thinking back to your episode with Sam, and you guys, and one of the things that y'all were talking about was collaboration and different things like this. And I realized it's this is the first project that I've collaborated with someone on for a long period of time in a long time. Normally, it's I don't know. I think it's easy to, at least for me, it's easy to mix up collaboration with a day's worth of work of hey, we're all going to get together and do this project. But this was a learning process for me too, as well, from a technical side and a management side and things like that. So I have to say thank you for accepting it and giving me the opportunity to grow and get better and understanding okay, where can this podcast really go? What can we really do with this thing? And the honest answer is I think the sky is the limit. We can do whatever we want with it.
Yeah.
So I think this would be a good time, and I don't know if other people are thinking about this, but I've told other people to start their own podcasts, and because they've talked to me about starting it. But after doing this, what have you learned about trying to start yours? Granted, you came into one that's already established, but I basically gave you microphones and said have fun.
Yeah. What did I learn? Starting off, technically,
technically in the field. What were things that you're okay, so next time we do this, I'm gonna remember this.
Yeah. So luckily I had some background with audio recording from my degree where I went to UNT and got my bachelor's in radio, television, film, and I worked took audio production class. I worked as an intern ship for the radio station. So I was pretty familiar with editing audio and splicing things together, and pretty familiar with recording audio because for filmmaking I would record audio too for interviews and stuff. So luckily I had that knowledge going into it. I guess one big takeaway I would say is just making sure that I would download the files as well and just make sure those are just backed up on my side, because shit happens and hard drives go down and sometimes files get lost, and that's really sucky like thing that happens. But we hopefully learn from those experiences and like take that forward to make sure we don't make those same mistakes. So yeah, it's just like that's definitely one thing. And then like I was only able to record like 2 of them in person, and like the ones at the end with Kat and Nikki, and that was like a challenge, I guess, to say, of like trying to be the host and like be there in the conversation and present with the 2 of them. Like they were separate, of course, but like, and then trying to also manage and think about the audio settings and the levels, and then making sure there's not background noise, or making sure like the microphones aren't being like messed with as we're recording. So there's like a lot of technical things that kind of fall through the cracks as I'm trying to like focus all my energy and be present in the conversation. Those things kind of can fall away from you. And I don't think it's necessarily like anything that like diminishes like what we captured in the conversation and how powerful it is.
100%
But
agree.
it's like for someone who's like an audiophile, or just like, you know, who's more of an audio nerd, like they're going to notice those things. But like most people won't really take it, you know. But I'm kind of tech person in general, like with like film and video and everything, and like photography. But it's just like I have to learn to like let those things go and just move forward. But like I said, using that information and try to do it better next time.
Yeah, I think the big thing is like that's the difference between a podcast and like broadcast and production. A podcast, like I think to a certain extent, unless you come off with your podcast like in a studio, really raw, really polished, which Sins and Suffers is not.
Yeah.
I think the thing is like I think people are more forgiving of that. And I also think your stories and what you were telling overshadowed anything else. I think people cared far more about like your message and what you were saying. And I don't think anything of that mattered. But I was curious just because like in my own experience of doing this podcast, I remember the first time I set up outdoors and I did not take into account of like where I was sitting. I wasn't like, I was in a park interviewing a friend, and this is an episode that I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day, but it was kind of like, you know, you do that when you're going to first sing, you ask a friend, you're like, hey, will you meet me here? I want to try this thing. I just want to practice, see if it will ever work. And we were interviewing in Mineral Wells State Park. It was I was there hanging out with them, taking some other friends climbing and doing some stuff. But at the end, I was like, do you want to try this? And the thing that I noticed the most was obviously I thought I was far enough away from the gate and the cars, everything like that. But the sound that was so prominent was the cars going over the speed bumps where you could hear the crunchiness of it.
Yeah.
And then it was repeatedly so loud. It was something that I thought I was far enough away. It was that. And there's all these little things you learn. And I think it's just like, it's much like climbing. It's like nuance, finesse, anything like that. I really like how you were talking about wanting to maintain your level of engagement, because I feel like that's sometimes hard, because I know for me, it's hard for me when I'm like, oh, they just said something I want to remember. And so I have these tricks that I do to help me remember what they're saying, but still be engaged in the conversation and still go back and forth. But it is still challenging. Was that the hardest part? Did you feel like, honestly, staying engaged with people throughout the length of the episodes when you were recording, do you feel like that was ever really a challenge? Were you ever really drained in your conversations?
I don't know if I'd use the word drain for like afterwards. I think I got better at it. Like, it was probably definitely a challenge in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think I got better at it as I went. And, you know, like I said, I have some experience from like doing interviews, like over video and stuff. So like I had that, like luckily I had that experience for like staying present and engaged in the conversation. So like I was able to like transfer that knowledge over, but like having it like on the podcast side of things and like being digital for a lot of them over, you know, an online service, that, you know, was a little bit different and like getting used to that. But I definitely was able to get better at as I went. But yeah, like you're saying, if there's something, you know, they said that you want to remember, it's like, you don't want to sit there and like look down at your keyboard and type it out really fast. Like I wanted to like be engaged with them and not seem like I'm trying to like, oh, well, let me do this really fast as you're talking. Like I am actually interested in what they're saying, and like wanting them to know that like I care about what they're saying, and like I want to like comprehend as much as I can.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think people are forgiving of that, but I do agree with you. Yeah, I know for me, it's like after a bunch of them, I guess the reason why I use that drained for me is sometimes I'm a little emotional, especially if the conversation is really emotional
Oh, yeah.
and heavy. I feel like my battery in that realm, and maybe I didn't preface it very well, but like, I think like, you know, with your skills and your interview skills, I see that as flawless, I guess is like once again, I speak for myself. I know, especially like even the interview I was doing last night with Caleb, there was one point of it where we were like talking about our parents and like what's going on and things like that. And I just remember like at the end of it, like that segment of it, I just had to sit back and like close my eyes for a minute and like mentally recharge my battery. And I guess, you know, I don't know, listening to most of your episodes, it was like, I guess that's the only thing I think of, because I'm just wondering if my experience and your experience is really close. But, you know, I think someone who doesn't know you, forgetting that you have and not knowing that you have that large of a background in this stuff, it makes sense.
Yeah. And like the one thing I want to add on to what you're saying about like, you're talking about like talking about like hard, like
Heavy.
previous like traumatic experiences probably is what it sounds like, or just
Oh,
like
just
past,
heavy in general.
heavy past experiences.
Yeah.
Can be emotionally draining.
Yeah.
And like I didn't go into as much as that about myself, so maybe that's why you have a different experience. Like I was trying to like, you know, share a little bit about myself in the episodes, but also, you know, I'm there to mostly listen to the other person and hear what their story is, but I wanted to also offer up some of my own information, so they felt like it was, you know, closer to being an equal conversation, but, you know, not focusing so much on myself as I am on them. And the other part that I forgot to say was like, after every episode, I would say I actually walked away like with the new energy and like this feeling of like connection and like feeling of like connection and energy. I walked away just like so happy and like inspired after every single conversation that I had. And I think the hardest one was the last one I recorded was with Kat at the Flash Foxy Festival, where we recorded in his rental car because like it was the end of the night and it was like I was like telling Kat, I was like, I want to be respectful. I've set a timer on my phone so I know that we were cut off at 45 minutes or whatever time we allotted for it. And then at the end of it, I was just like, it's like almost 11 p.m. and I'm like, I have to go to bed now. Like, how am I going to sleep after this conversation? Because I had so much energy from it. It was just like, it was great. And I guess like on that note, there was something I wanted to like throw in about the experience of just like, or I guess I'll cover it later because I'm gonna talk about like, you know, the changes from like technical things and like things I've gone through. I just wanted to note that to myself to come back to that. But yeah, and I would say like the other thing, like technically wise with the podcast in general, like learning, like I never would consider myself like a producer, because that entails more of like the scheduling and business side of things that I don't see myself as skilled at. But this podcast definitely has helped me learn and grow in those aspects as well. I'm not saying I was perfect at it. I definitely dropped the ball here and there and like was really like upset with myself about it. And like generally I'm really hard on myself. So like I'm like, you know, anything that I did, I tried my best to, you know, acknowledge my mistake and like acknowledge it to the person I did it with and like try to move forward from there and like letting them know I'm trying to make it right now.
Yeah.
And make up for that.
I think the series turned out amazing, regardless of like our hiccups. And I also want to give probably a thing too. It's like anyone listening to this, you're probably, I don't know, half of you our audio files are like, yay. And the other people who know no difference. And like this, I was too busy crying through the whole thing, or super emotional or cheering. Or you really, this is just because we're two people who want to do our best. And, you know, it's like those memes that go out on the Instagram. You're going to suck in the beginning, or it's not always going to be perfect, but we're getting better. And pardon, clearing out the pipes. But yeah, and this is also kind of like, I guess, kind of what you guys would hear is kind of behind the scenes talk of like, what did we learn going back and forth? Because it's funny you say that. And I feel like I had to be in the producer's seat, and between working with you, Daniel, myself, traveling, still recording a little bit on my own, getting ready for the upcoming season. And it's like, it was a huge management and learning experience, which, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, balls were dropped on both of us because, you know, and if you guys are really interested in knowing what those are, you can reach out to us. But let's just say, like, we are immensely excited for next year, and we are immensely excited to grow this and do July and August next year and have another set of series of episodes coming out that are going to be awesome. But on that note, I'd like to kind of showcase what we do have.
Yeah.
And you have selected a bunch of clips, and then so I'd like to go for us just to kind of go listen to them, and then in my mind, you know, and run with it however you want, but in my mind, I think there's always, like, you know, a physical, emotional, and a spiritual effect to anything that we do. You know, like climbing, physically you get better, spiritually you get bolder, emotionally I think you're able to dig deeper, especially when things don't go your way or when things do go your way. And those are like, that's just generally my thought. Like, you know, your heart, your mind, and your heart, your mind, and your gut all have something to say with everything. And I feel, I don't know, like just kind of putting all this together right before we hit record here, I was letting my mind begin to dabble on that. But I would definitely really want to know, like, why you chose all these and what they mean to you. And I guess, yeah, we can just kind of get into it.
Yeah. Before we go into that, can I like share a little bit more about like the experience? Like, I think just giving like a little history of like how like this started basically, like, and it's been like I started recording last March or April, I think was like the first, I recorded the first one. No,
it was before that.
Well, yeah, there was like the first episode we recorded like in January.
Yes.
And then we picked up and resumed. So yeah, January 2021 was the first one. And then I picked up doing, and that was in person. And then the other ones we picked up, I did those online. And that was like in March or April, I think I started. And like my whole like transformation of where I started on the podcast, like in terms of like as a climber and like not feeling like I was like qualified to like come in and like host a podcast about climbing.
Overqualified.
I know. Oh, it was so funny because like I was at the point like of only climbing, like I started 2019, so that was beginning of 2021, so it was only in like 2 years of just climbing in the gym. I hadn't even got to climb outside yet. And like I was talking to all these like really like established and like really solid climbers who were climbing outside constantly. And in the beginning I felt so like just like I have no idea like what to talk about in this situation or how to kind of relate to it. And it wasn't until like after like the second or third episode that I finally made it outdoors and could actually like, oh, I understand this now, and like what people were talking about in terms of like getting to climb outside, or like I like to say climbing in nature. Sounds really cheesy, but it actually like really like it has a whole different experience for me.
You know, that was an intentional choice of mine, knowing that you haven't climbed so long. Because like, don't get me wrong, like you can have this more experienced climber and this person who's had all this, you know, done stuff in the valley and yada yada and Moab and whatever, all the places in the world to climb. But that conversation to me is a conversation that you have at the campground. The conversations that I wanted to hear from you is basically the same level of conversations that I have with you in the gym, where you talk about your life and you talk about what you know, how you've gone and your process and everything that you've been doing, and you're growing and finding love. And like, these are the conversations that I have with you. And I felt like you were uniquely in the position, because you are not overly seasoned by the world of climbing. You kind of had this perspective of like, I know nothing, I have nothing to lose, so I have everything to gain.
Yeah.
And Caleb and I talked about this last night. When you say nothing matters, I believe there's only 3 kinds of responses. Nothing matters, so I'm just going to just do whatever I want. Nothing matters, so I don't care anymore, I'm going to lie here. Nothing matters, I have nothing to lose. And I feel like you were the third. of that, the latter part, because when I was talking to you every day and just passing in the gym, like
Yeah.
I was rattling on, and I think I even told you, I was like, I've been rattling on this thought in my head for a
Yeah.
little while. It's like I wasn't sure about it.
Yeah, because at first it started off like, oh yeah, I want to have you on an episode, and then you
Yeah.
came back a couple months later, like, hey, how about this?
Yeah, because it's like, and ultimately I didn't, and I think that also boiled down to is like, I personally just did not feel comfortable doing a deliberate LGBTQ plus month, and also not doing it on January and June. I just didn't want to do it that time too. I mean, that also worked out well with timing and us, but like, I don't know. I just never felt like I was like, like, it's my lived experiences will never do this full justice. And I think our last 2 episodes that went out, yours with Nikki and mine with Nikki, and I listened to both of them back to back. They are so different. They are so
I haven't
different.
got to listen with yours with Nikki yet, but I'm excited too.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I listened to yours first, and then I went back, and then I listened to this one, and I was just like, the message is virtually the same from Nikki, because we all know what she stands for. She's very firm in that. But like the level of relation, the level of intimacy, the level of this, and the type of intimacy that is, it's so different. And I was just listening to it, and I was like, I would have never had this perspective if Alexa hadn't talked to her.
Yeah.
Like I would have never known. And I recorded that thing so long ago, I forgot about it. Like I really forgot like the conversations that I had with her.
Yeah.
And then listening to what yours, I was like, that just, it's so different. And I think it just breeds truth to lived experiences and life experiences. And so, yeah, just because you've been climbing 2 years, it made you the perfect person. Perfect person.
Yeah, like it was one of the things I loved about, because we recorded these like last year, and then getting to go back and listen to them, and I could like hear my own growth as a climber, and like my knowledge and like what I'd experienced recently in that recording. And I remember specifically listening to the episode with Nana and how they were talking about how they were like so pumped after getting to climb outside and starting Belial and everything. And I had like this very similar energy, because I had just gotten back like from the weekend prior to going up to like Horseshoe Canyon Ranch for the first time. And I was so pumped about climbing outside after that first trip. And just like, I went on the trip, and it was people I met through the gym. And there was one other queer person there. This guy, Sean, who was great and so much fun to climb with, but everyone else there was like, cis het people that I, enjoyed climbing with. But really like most of my like network and like people I hang out with are like more like queer trans people. So it was like the most time that I spent with other like cis het people for a long time, and just was kind of nervous not knowing going into that experience, like how people would like treat me outside of just the climbing time, But I still had like a really fun time and enjoyed it. But it just reminded me that much more of like, I would love to have an experience where I get to go outside and climb with a group of queer people. And the amazing thing is, like, I thought about that and like wanted to like, help create something like that. But in reality, like I'm still so early in my climbing journey that like, I don't have the resources to put something like that together just yet. I want to get to that point, but I was able to actually do that the end of last year in November. I got to go out to this event called Climb Out Camp Out. And originally it was supposed to take place like at outside like Mammoth Lake up in like more like it's not Northern California, but it's like, it's further north than Joshua Tree.
Yep.
And originally it was supposed to happen there in September, but it got bumped because of the wildfires last year. And they moved it to Joshua Tree in November. So I took like this whole like week-long road trip, my first like solo trip by myself that I've ever done. And I called it my queercation, because it was all leading up to this weekend where I got to go and climb in Joshua Tree, where it was a strictly like queer climbing event. That Bree, I can't remember her last name. I'm so bad right now. But Bree was one of the, she's a fellow trans woman, and she was one of the organizers for it. I'm just like so excited to see her and so many other queer guides. Everyone there was queer in the community some relational way. Or like all the guides were queer. Everyone who attended was in the community. And so like leading up to that, like I made it intentional to like, like along the way I stopped, like in Albuquerque, I stayed with a friend. And like, he was, a trans guy that I met through the support group, and I stayed with him and his husband, and that was a really great, evening staying there. And then I drove to Sedona the next day and met up with this other trans woman who climbs, and we climbed like half a day in Sedona together, and I camped there. And then the next day I drove to LA and I stayed with some friends that I knew from this area that also work in like the video world that are also queer. And then from there I drove all the way up to San Francisco, and by my friend's advice, I took the Highway 1
Oh, yeah.
instead of taking the interstate. That would have been faster, but I was so glad I did because it was one of the most beautiful drives
Highway 1
that I
is
have
gorgeous.
ever done. And I was so glad the actual sun peeked out for a little bit at sunset, and it was just gorgeous. And I stopped at this rest stop that my friends told me about and took some pictures and some drone footage, and it was gorgeous. It was worth the extra couple hours that it took. But the only scary part, if you haven't driven the one, just be certain that your car is like safe to drive out into places where you don't have access to cell phone signal. And like, because if your car goes down out there, you're like pretty much fucked, because there's like areas out there that you're just like completely secluded and you have no cell signal. So I just want to preface that for people. Just be safe.
Okay.
Think about having your car, inspected and making sure it's good to go, and you have fresh tires, because you don't want to get stranded out there on the Highway 1. It's beautiful, but just
It's remote.
have that caution of it being remote, like any other places you travel to. But it's just not something I would have thought about till I was driving and trying to like pull up, directions. I was like, well, I'll just follow the signs to San Francisco then. And then, yeah, San Francisco, I stayed there for a couple of days, just like in a hostel downtown. And I linked up with this other trans woman that I met on Instagram. We were supposed to go climbing together, but like she had just like hurt herself playing rugby, so we didn't get to climb together. But I still went to the I think it was Pacific Pipework.
Pipeworks.
Yeah, Pacific Pipeworks.
Pipeworks, yeah.
And
That
they
gym's
just
a
opened a new
legend.
gym there, and it was massive and so much fun. I was able to find someone to climb with. And then, yeah, from there, I drove down to Joshua Tree for that weekend and did the climbing trip. And it was such an amazing experience. And the funny thing is, like, looking back at the episodes and listening to them, like, I know a lot of, like, queer friends that, like, have found partners through climbing at the gym or just like outdoor climbing. And I was listening to the episodes last night to like get, go through the sound bites and stuff. I remember Sam talking about how he met his boyfriend at a climbing festival, and it just like made me smile for a second, because I realized like that was really cool when I heard it. And like when I recorded the episode and everything last year, I was like pretty much single. And then at the trip in Joshua Tree, I met my partner. Just like unknowingly, I went in just like to have a good time and meet all these other people. I had no intentions walking away like with someone's Instagram handle thinking I was going to message them and that we end up in a relationship. Like that was nowhere like in my like intentions or what I was like expecting to walk away with. But yeah, I met my partner Xander while I was there, and we just like it was funny. Like, we exchanged like Instagram handles because there was no signal, just like putting in our notes.
Oh, yeah.
And then from there, we just started messaging, and then we started like FaceTiming from that. And then like, scheduled our first date because like they're based out of San Diego. So we like met in the middle at this place in New Mexico at these hot springs. And then from there, we've been in a relationship since like the beginning of January. And it's just like this like beautiful thing that I'm like so grateful for, that I went on that trip and like took that risk to go by myself and like found like love at this like, infinity space for queer people for climbing. And yeah, it's really great. And I just want to thank them for like patience that like the timing, like the podcast has like taken like for my life and stuff. And like, especially I was at the Flash Foxy Festival and like taking time away, like hanging out with them or like spending time with them. Like I stepped out to like go record episodes and stuff. So like, I just want to say thank you, Xander, for your support and patience. I love you. Thank you. Just had to throw that in there.
That's beautiful.
But yeah, like everything else, like in terms of like climbing and stuff, I was just like super happy with everything that I learned and being able to like meet and talk to all these amazing climbers. And like, it's cool because I've like, so far of everyone I talked to, I haven't got to like meet up with anyone in person yet besides Thor. And I actually got to take like Laura's like falling clinic when I was at the Flash Foxy Festival
okay.
that they led. So like we didn't really climb together, but you know, like they led the course and like I'm on the wall and they're there and stuff. So
Close enough.
I'm counting it. And it was really great to just like meet them in person, and they were just as amazing in person as they, you know, were on the call and stuff. And like that's one thing I realized last night re-listening through Laura's clips was that I noticed for like a lot of like really strong, like really amazing climbers is that they don't have an ego. Like some of the best climbers I've met, like I had the privilege of meeting Alex Honnold this last summer, and the guy had no ego in sight. He was so cool and relaxed and just like willing to talk to like everyone at the gym who was like coming up to him constantly and like asking for a selfie or just like saying something, and like he was cool with conversation with everybody. Like from what I heard and like talked to the staff, like he had a hard out that he had to leave by, like from his like management side, because he would just stay the whole time and continue talking and like signing like autographs and stuff. So he just like the nicest person and just like able to like give back to the community and like be that person and like willing to spend that time with people was just like so incredible to see. And like I like saw that and heard the similarities to like Lore last night and like when I was listening to those clips and just hearing the humility that they had around like things that they had like, you know, had to go through in like terms of discrimination of like being like non-binary and stuff. And I was just like, wow, they handled this like so well. And it was just like incredible. I was like, I really like strive to be able to handle things in a better way without like feeling so like attacked and like my ego like reacting to things. Like they were just like, I was blown away. But yeah, I'll get into that more when we get to the clips for sure. I think I just wanted to go over those few things about like the climbing and everything else. But yeah, it definitely grew and changed for the better a lot this last year, and super grateful for the podcast for allowing me to do that.
Well, I think the podcast is better with you in it by far. Like the podcast is better with you nowhere than without you anywhere. So I really am excited, and I'm looking forward to doing this again. But yeah, it's funny. It's like you just forget how much time passes when you. Podcasts are like, anything we create, content, it's virtually a Polaroid, whether it's digital or not, because you're transported back to that moment and you're transported back to that time and listening back to it, especially because it's a conversation. There's so many like cues to like really help you remember where you are and what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. All right. Well, shall we?
Yeah. Good.
All right.
The thing that I really came back to was that climbing brings me joy. I get to be joyful when I'm out. I get to be joyful spending my days out with people that I love. And I think that for me, like finding ways to just access joy that like has no boundaries, like just getting to like throw myself into something I love, especially in a world where like I don't always feel like that's expected for me, has been really powerful. So honestly, I don't overthink it. I do it because I love it and it brings me joy.
So yeah, the first one was with my conversation with Lore. And yeah, they're just like talking about, the reason they climb is for the joy that it brings them. And that just really like resonated with me. Because like I asked that question to like pretty much everyone, and just like hearing their response really just like clicked with the sense of like, the joy that it brings me to be able, like there's also like another like section later in that in the interview where it talks about like as like for them as a non-binary person and like the issues that like they face as being non-binary and the issues I face as like being trans, like in a country that's so divided and like up in arms against like trying to take away like our basic human rights. Like it's exhausting, like emotionally, to be in that situation and like have to go up against those things every day for years now. Like being able to turn to climbing is like such an important thing for me, and like from what Laura said, for them, like being able to access joy is like what that helps them do. It also helps me access my joy and access like presencing myself. That's another thing that a lot of people talked about, was like climbing, like it was almost like a meditation. Like I heard someone else say that it was like something that helped me presence myself in the moment, because I get really tied up by a lot of things in the media and like in the news about, like I said, like, you know, basic human rights being taken away and all these other things that are going on in the world and in our country. And so being able to like get to the gym to experience joy through all of that is so important. And to hear the way that Laura expressed it was just so refreshing and just so inviting, that I was just like super, you know, touched by the way they were able to express it. And yeah, it just like, it reminds me why I hate being injured. Like this last week, unfortunately, I just like kind of strained one of my pulleys, and like that evening, I was so scared. I was like, I really hope I didn't mess up my pulley. Like that means I won't be able to climb for like a month and a half or so, depending on how severe it is, because like climbing is really literally that important to me, where it's one of those things that's almost like a therapy, another version of therapy for myself to help presence myself. And the joy that I get from it, like I'm going to be without that for a little bit. And that just makes me really sad. So I was like, you know, bummed out about it and kind of depressed like this last week for a couple days. But like I was able to like not focus on it so much and like keep myself occupied with things, to not like really like, you know, just spin around in that depression, and like that would make it worse.
Yeah.
So like being able to have things to work on really helped me. But yeah, I'm, you know, for a little bit right now, in the next month or so, I'll miss that joy, but look forward to coming back to it and do my best to avoid making a similar mistake.
You know, listening to that clip, I think one of the things that I heard, I think they have the unique ability to be able to honestly like muster up the good in the situation that they're in. And I think they also have that ability, like climbing is what does it for Laura. But I have a strong feeling if climbing wasn't accessible, like Laura, just the energy that comes off, I feel like they would be able to find it or find their way to exalt joy in some other form. Like I said, I don't know. I'm going with that. It's just the energy that I get from Laura. And I don't know. I didn't get to live.
Yeah, their energy is like infectious in a good
Yeah, I
way.
guess that's the way I'm really trying to say it, because it seems
It's
contagious.
it's contagious, and like from like being around them in person, like back in March at the Flash Foxy Fest, like
How was that clinic overall?
it was so amazing. Like I was so grateful I was able to get in the clinic, and like Xander actually, my partner, joined me in the clinic as well, and so that was like, it was fun, but also like it was like the second time we got to climb together outside. And when you're doing like a falling clinic, you're going through a lot of emotions.
Yeah, you're building trust.
And like building trust and like going through like a lot of emotions and like processing like how to like fall not correctly, but
I mean, no, you're right.
fall in a way that reduces risks.
Yeah.
Not safely, but reducing risk and assessing that risk when you're on the wall and looking down. But like I learned so many helpful tips that have helped me like be better at taking falls and lead, or taking whips, whatever you want to call it. And I definitely like learned a lot. And like, you know, there was like one tense moment where I remember I was like really overwhelmed with what was going on. And like I had to like step away from the wall and like from everyone else, because I needed a moment to myself just to like process what I was going through emotionally. And it was like really severe. And like Laura like walked over and like found me where I like kind of gone down the side of the approach where we're at, like all these rocks and stuff, and I was trying to just seclude myself so people wouldn't see me like having my moment. And like Laura found me and just came over and just like checked on me to make sure I was okay. And that was really special, and I felt really supported by them in that moment. And just like they helped me be able to like calm down and just like get back to what we were there.
Lore sounds like they are spectacular at their job.
Yeah, they're also like they're training to be they're going into like field of mental health. I can't remember what exactly their training is, but like they're like studying to be like I want to like it's either like I don't think it's therapy. It's like either psychology, psychiatry,
like adventure
it's,
therapy.
yeah, like something. I don't know if it's especially, but I think it's more like both focused on like queer like psychology or like queer like access for like queer mental health and like helping the community. And like I got like all of that from them and like their knowledge, and it just really made me feel supported like moving forward. And like I mentioned, like this breathing exercise that I did that would help me calm down, and they're like, oh yeah, I love that exercise.
That's awesome.
And it was just really cool to like, I was like talking through what I was going through, and they had mentioned how they had gone through similar things and like similar feelings, and I would never have guessed that they had experienced like similar thoughts or emotions around like what I was experiencing. And that made me feel a lot less alone in that moment, and like feeling, present with where I was at, like in the space, and that moment, and with them to feel that was like the best thing. So thank you, Laura, again for the amazing clinic and for just like being there and supporting me through everything that weekend. It was really special.
I believe the next clip we have is Claire.
Up until that point of being honest and truthful about who I am, I was never able to process trauma from my past. It all just got buried deep. So once this process started, all this stuff just has been coming out of the floodgates. And one thing that our society in the US has taught me is to not trust people. So I already had this introduction to climbing and this connection to nature that was always good and healing, blah, blah, blah. But climbing is such an intimate and can be such a dangerous thing to do that you have to be able to build trust.
I think the reoccurring theme there is like you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, like you just can't do it alone.
Yeah. That's like one of the things I got out of that conversation with Claire, and especially like that clip, was like listening to her like talk about the process. Like at the beginning, she's talking about the process of like her transitioning basically, and how beginning the process of transitioning, all of these things from her past, all these like traumatic experiences that like, she had essentially just like, suppressed. And that really stood out and resonated with me as another trans person, another trans woman. And like, I could totally, really relate to that feeling of like the beginning of transition and all these things that I have suppressed for so long, and all these like hardships or traumas, whatever you want to call it, that I had faced at a younger age were like resurfacing for the first time because I never knew how to like process or like properly manage it, where like essentially those things had reprogrammed my brain in a certain way to learn how to survive, because I didn't know how to deal with it properly at such a young age. And no one does as a kid. No one has that information or that training. We're all kids. We all come into this world with, parents who are human beings that have flaws because they're human, and they're not going to get everything right. And it's just like one of those things, we have to grow up and be able to like not sit there and like, I mean, there are exceptions to this with like abusive like family members and everything else, but like in terms of like, if you had an upbringing where you weren't like, abused or like assaulted or, in any type of way, like, you have to be able to look back and give your parents or your family for things that happened that, changed your course of development and your growth and like your way for learning about, like, how your mind um, reprograms itself through traumas for you to survive as a child. And, that carries that sticks with you. And being able to reprogram your mind and like reparent yourself essentially as the person you are. As like, for me, as a trans woman, I had to do a lot of, I'm still working on it, like reparenting myself in a lot of ways that better support me in my growth and my way to express my emotions and process them, and being able to like work through like all these hardships and stuff. It's a lot, and it's a lot of work. And just like hearing her experience and how she also was going through similar things. And for her, a lot of it stemmed around trust, and she had a lot of issues trusting people. And I was really grateful to hear her process for how transitioning and then getting to, get back to climbing, and how that allowed her to develop the tools to be able to trust again. And that's, like you said, so important for climbing, and
It is.
in life in general. All these things transfer so well from climbing into like our lives as human beings. Like it's so vital.
I like how you use the word reparenting, and it's almost, I've never heard it before. And to me, it's almost like reparenting also is like redefining one's values, redefining one's character, redefining one's, integrity and how they're going to move through this world. And I think that's really beautiful. I've never heard that before. Reparenting.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge like mental health like nerd, and just in therapy the last 4.5 years, and that's like something that definitely comes up a lot for myself, and I think it's a really positive thing. So
Agreed. Next we have our main man Kat on the mic. Before we dive into anything, actually not. We'll
let the soundbite speak for itself. And then
Yes, it's
in afterwards.
Yeah, it's more of another larger question, but yes, here we go. Ready? Boom.
Hat runner.
And it's you just it feels magical to be able to float through moves or across the wall, because you're doing this thing, but you are at that moment, you may not be actively recognizing, you are so in tuned with your body and its communication that it is allowing it to happen. Things are happening intuitively. You're giving yourself to your intuitions, to your natural movement. You may also be trying very hard, but it's just like, there's a moment of peace as you're doing it. They're not combating each other, and they're just working as one. And that's a really magical feeling when you've spent so long feeling like they're just like knocking heads and just like hating each other all the time.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that approach, but like as a trans person, yeah, that's such a crazy thing for your mind and body to be like at one and at peace. That's wow. Thanks for
working
that.
together.
They're working together.
They're
once,
working
and
together finally.
They're finally working together. Oh my gosh, it's happening. Nature's healing itself. That's my plan there.
You may be trying hard, you may be doing hard moves, but it's doing what you're telling it to do.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh.
It's not fighting back.
I think that is a very unique experience to the trans community, because I legitimately cannot think of an experience in my life in this exact moment. And I'm not saying like I have experienced, I'm not, by no means am I saying I've experienced everything in life, by no means, nor do I want to. But I generally can kind of be like, well, maybe it's kind of like a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and that. But I'm like, nope. I have no freaking clue. Like none. can you kind of like, I mean, I think add a little context and unpack exactly like what you're talking about for like
Oh yeah.
just us cisgender community. Like if you're going to put it in like, yeah, like that's it. Like
Yeah.
what exactly are you talking about? Like your mind and your body are fighting against you.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I selected this clip, because it was so like I was like completely like surprised by like the way Kat started off. I didn't expect him to go where he went. And like as you can hear, like we're both just basically laughing at the end because it's so freaking true for like as trans people and as like trans climbers, the idea of our like bodies and our minds working together. Whereas in like most of our past, like prior to transition, we haven't really felt like we've had that connection. Where like, you know, as like a trans person, like I, you know, was born and assigned male at birth and, you know, grew up 27 years in the body I had that was, you know, producing testosterone and like putting that through my body. And that, you know, started a puberty for me at a younger age that, you know, put me through a lot of things, and my body, you know, changed in certain ways that didn't really feel like right or like the right thing for me in terms of like my gender identity. So like that's like the kind of, I guess the joke there is just like it's like climbing as a trans person is really amazing because it allows our minds and our bodies to be in agreement and like to be connected and working together, where it feels like for me and for Kat, at least in that conversation, was like it was humorous because like we're not used to that experience of our minds and bodies working together and feeling like they're on the same page, because for a lot of our experiences we've had a lot of like gender dysphoria, and a lot of the times that gender dysphoria can be mental things, but it can also be a lot of physical things with the body.
Can you elaborate on that just a little bit? Because I don't think that's like a common, like gender dysphoria.
Yeah.
It's a very common word in cis vocabulary.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I will.
Yeah,
I'll back it up there and give a little explanation.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a textbook.
Yeah,
but just like a short snippet.
It's totally fine. So, gender dysphoria is a thing that certain trans people can feel. It's not something that's required to be transgender, but it's something that a lot of trans people do experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is the feeling of, you know, it's basically the feeling of like having your gender identity not aligning with the body that you are in, essentially. And so
Okay.
there can be like mental things that you feel that can cause gender dysphoria,
Okay.
and like terms of like experiences that you have or like things that people say that can trigger that dysphoria for you. Like I'm trying to think of a recent example. Okay, here's a recent example for me. I was just watching, I was with my partner, and they were watching like one of like RuPaul's Drag Race's like recent like all-star like seasons or something. And like I love drag, don't get me wrong, I love it so much. I found it as a very important thing for me in the beginning of my transition, that I actually like took this like drag like boot camp workshop class and like did like a whole number and stuff.
That's
and then like
awesome.
and then like did a second thing, and it really helped me to be able to explore gender and like presentation and like my inner femininity that I hadn't been able to really access and like proudly display. And it helped me really figure things out for myself in terms of like my identity and the expression and like what I was able to feel and like portray. And because I grew up in theater and like performing and stuff, so it was also just like a really fun experience to like get back on a stage, and felt really, really good. But like in the process of like doing all of that, I realized how hard drag is. Like
It don't
drag
look easy.
Drag is like such a like underappreciated art form. For like there's so many elements in it. Like it's a very expensive hobby. if you're
I
just
can
doing
imagine.
it on your own, because like you first off you have like the makeup and like the wigs and like the costuming and like props or anything else that you factor in, and you have to go buy that shit by yourself, and then you're working on like the choreography and like the dance moves, and you have to like, you know, find the right song. Sometimes you have to go in and edit the song or find someone to edit for you if you don't have that ability to do it yourself, and the means of doing it. And then like there's like, yeah, like I said, the whole performance side of it and like stage presence and everything else. There's so much that goes into it that I didn't realize going into that class that I was so grateful for to learn. And then I did it like another time for like this like another drag show that I did, and then like after that like I like stopped because I was so like worn out and exhausted from it, and I was like so grateful for my experience, but I realized it's something that I would be able to watch from a distance and appreciate other people doing it. And like I still enjoy like watching like drag shows and like going to local
Yeah.
places. But for me, getting back to what I was saying, the reason I got triggered with some gender dysphoria, I was watching the RuPaul's Drag Race, and in the past RuPaul has been known for saying some like really like hurtful things about the trans community, and like trying to keep trans women from competing on the show, and like said some really transphobic comments that like I went and looked at recently to just like see what he said and be like, why do I feel this like, you know, this whole beef about him as a person, because like the things that he said, and like I need to look at, you know, the ability of maybe me needing to look and try to like look and forgive him for the things he said, because he's apologized, but like it's harder to let that go whenever he's someone with such a platform that like
Yeah.
has a show that so many people watch. And the thing for me that triggered my dysphoria was like I never watched the show, and I didn't understand why until like I was like talking over with my therapist the other week. But like when I started watching it, because Xander enjoys watching it, I was like trying to watch it, and just like within a few minutes I started feeling really dysphoric. And I was like, I said I was talking about it with my therapist, and I didn't really understand why. And I was like, well, I think the thing is like predominantly people, like the contestants, the drag queens on the show, majority of them are cis gay men. There are some trans women now on the show, and there are some like trans like non-binary people, I think, but majority of them are cis gay men. And for me as a trans woman to see these cisgender gay men go on a show and perform femininity and like at such a high level, I felt like I was like not doing a good enough job as myself as a trans woman, and like
yeah.
because like,
Okay.
oh well, there's a cis gay
Okay.
man who can do this better than me, and like comparing myself to these men, to these cis gay men, and like it just put me in this really bad headspace about not feeling valid enough in who I am and my, you know, identity as a woman. And I started to compare myself, and I just felt really shitty about like my, you know, experience and how I could like display, you know, like traditional femininity, which is like total bullshit, because it's like all of these standards that like our culture and like beauty standards have imposed on us as a culture to what actual beauty is. And it's like this very like toxic system of like imposing that on people to say you must look like this and you must do this to be beautiful or be pretty. And
That's marketing.
that's all marketing, and it's all advertising and everything else to sell things, but it's like it's entrenched itself in our culture and in our minds of so many like women in general, that's like we struggle with like our body image because of what, you know, media and society is like, you know, embedded in our brains like since we were kids. And like in advertising, it's just continually reinforced.
Yeah,
It's
no.
getting a little bit better. Like there is like become to get a little bit more inclusion in the like whole like media and like modeling world, like having more size inclusivity and like gender inclusivity, but it's like it's just the beginning,
Yeah.
and it's something that still needs to be like
I think fashion is definitely going to lead that way. But for that show, though, I think I've always thought that drag in itself is an entire production. It is
Yeah.
not this thing, like it is all encompassing. It is because I've watched that show once. And when I say once, I watched like 5 or 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Because I was just curious, and then I'd said the same thing, and I never knew that you did a boot camp, but I remember I was like, this is hard work. Like, this is like some serious hard work. Like, this is not like crocheting in your living room when you're bored and you have Netflix on and you're trying to see if you can do 2 things. Like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
It's a full thing.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by it. I do think that's interesting how that triggered you in that way. And I think you're right. You know, it's like society as a whole has just put norms on everything. And I think the beauty of it is society puts those norms. Society set those norms. Society is now changing norms, and society is now moving forward. Some people don't like it. Some people do like it. It's not my opinion, and it's never been my opinion or job to tell you what you do and don't like. You're allowed to love who you want to love, like what you want to like, say what you want to say. I mean,
yeah, as long as you're not hurting people in the process or like doing something toxic in a way that hurts or discriminates against somebody, then you're okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say, and this is just my kind of hard stance on this. I definitely, as long as you are openly not attacking someone, what you say in private, what you say is anything, you know, people are going to say what they're going to say, and whether it's hurtful or not. I'm a firm believer. I'm not going to stop anyone from saying something hurtful because, and this is just why I say this, and I know a lot of people might push back with me of this. I would rather someone say something hurtful than bottle it in and then do something harmful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that because like not necessarily like I want them to say something hurtful, but like
no, but if they're gonna say
they
it,
need
like,
to say something, and that way they can learn from that mistake.
Absolutely.
And like be able to learn from that because it's something from their past, that conditioning or that, that wiring of like how culture taught them about like, how they should perceive a certain person. And
or bare minimum, be in a situation where if you're going to say something like that because your past and your status and this is your truth and this is your reality and you think the whole world should be this way, at least be in a situation where you can have the conversation with someone, because I think that's kind of like a big thing too. It's like, especially in this polarized country that we live in, everyone's like, well, we're talking. I'm like, no, we're like, a lot of people are just shouting at each other.
You're just yelling at each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's not a conversation involved, and understanding, and especially when it comes to understanding values and understanding where people are coming from, it's not one conversation. It is building a community, a communication relationship, or a relationship of communication. Maybe that's the better way to say it, a relationship of communication. It's a process because, I take a very firm stance on, like, I might not like it, but I'm happy you're talking to me about it than just sitting there and stewing on it. And I think that's like a big thing that, like, I don't know. I just don't think that thought concept gets mentioned enough because we see it happening. I mean, we see it outburst in violence against people. And I think the reality is if that person would have had someone to talk to, even if it would have been a little bit of a nasty conversation, the violence, the odds are that, and I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a police officer, I don't have stats, I don't have anything to run this off of. I'm just a human being thinking about when, and I'm not perfect, and so I'll admit my own faults. People have made me angry enough where I'm like, ugh, like all of us are like, I just want to like strangle you, or I just want to be mad at you, or I just want to do something. But then when you can kind of let that out, and it's as a figure of speech, like, but when people have that and they don't, and they just bottle it, and it turns and it turns and it turns and it turns, boom, as you so elegantly showed. And it's just like, this gets into like a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about, which we will probably
it comes up later actually. And it's funny that we're talking about this with Cat's Clip because later on there's one more that we kind of go into this very topic that we're talking about now. But I can kind of try to dial it back in. And just wrap it up about like the whole, reason of like, like gender dysphoria. And like I talked about like, how I experienced that mentally, but there's also like physical experiences. And I feel like I experienced it more in the beginning of my transition of terms of like having it relate to my body and how I feel about it. And there was like a lot of things, that I would, try to wear or something else. And it just like one of the main major things that surrounded me for my dysphoria with my body was like I have dark hair. So I had a lot of like dark facial hair that would continuously, even if I shaved it prior, like the day of, you know, I still have this shadow there. And that was like a big source of like gender dysphoria for me for such a long time until I did like a shit ton of laser hair removal. It's still not all gone, but it's a lot more manageable now, and I have less gender dysphoria surrounding like my face and like it, you know, like just having that as something that just like makes me feel like less than or not really happy with my body. So whenever we're talking about our bodies and our minds working together, that's the kind of thing that Kat and I were talking about basically. And just being able to have that connection of like having our minds working together with our bodies when we're climbing and experiencing that intuition is peaceful and like magical, as Kat was saying.
I feel like I definitely picked up on that from a physical standpoint of view. And I'm happy you kind of got into an emotional and spiritual side of it too, because once again, like as you stated in the beginning of this thing, I think with anything that matters in your life, your heart, your mind, and your gut have all got to agree. And that's something my therapist told me that I'll never forget, you know, and it's like, they don't all have to be in 100%, but like two of them, at least two of them got to be like, okay, we're in. And then they'll convince the third one, even if the third one's like 50-50.
Yeah.
You know, and so.
Really funny the way you like mentioned that, because like for me, in terms of the beginning of my transition, and you know, I talked about like, you know, like testosterone wasn't the right thing for my body. And for me in my development as a human and like as, you know, as a woman, as a trans woman I am, and the moment I was able to start HRT and start taking and putting like estradiol into my body, and that was, you know, became the main hormone, the predominant hormone, because like every person has, you know, estrogen and testosterone in their body. It's just there's one that's more dominant than the other, and your body needs that to survive. You can't just completely remove hormones from the body, because then your body's going to have a lot of issues and not be in a good place. I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak too well, but
It sounds bad.
Essentially, whenever I was able to like start taking estradiol, and now I do injections, not a big deal or important to like talk about that specifically, but the amount of peace, I don't know if it was placebo or not, the amount of peace that I felt whenever I started it, and it did enact a lot of like emotional changes as well that I wasn't like, I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for just because I hadn't experienced it. But it also, interestingly enough, like has affected the way that like I like am attracted to people, and the way that like prior to anything, you know, like I was really grateful whenever I was able to like get into like a year of transition, and like I'm sure you, as you know, as a man, like know and understand testosterone can like, it's like it causes people to be very thirsty, and they essentially like, it was, you know, prior to transitioning, like it was just like so easily for your mind to just turn to sex, and like that's testosterone at work. Like testosterone coursing through your blood causes you to think about like that, you know. And I think it comes down to like also like, you know, our ancestors and just like the need to survive and reproduce and everything, procreate, like it all comes down to that. But now it's not as important, so our mind, you know, it drifts to sex and like that pleasure of sex, and like that's why people with testosterone like running their bodies like are able to just so fastly go into that. And then for that to be removed was such a relief, and not have to experience like
That's
this like
interesting.
constant like sex drive of just like it would just like randomly flip on if you saw something that you found attractive. Like I'm sure you've probably experienced that at some point in your life.
I mean, yes, I am a red-blooded cis male.
Yeah,
It
so
definitely
like
happened.
it happens with anyone who has testosterone like drive in the system. Like I've talked to trans men who have been like, I wasn't expecting this, and it's just like funny to hear their experiences as well. But I was just like really glad to like have that kind of fade away, and then like my terms of attraction for somebody also shifted, because like before it was just like a physical thing that I needed from another person or a partner that I was with. I needed like a physical attraction to be like interested in like pursuing any type of like physical, you know, attention or any type of like, you know, interaction like sexually or anything else.
Yeah.
But now like when I started like dating and like, you know, having my own like discovery of my body, like after being on hormones for a while, like all that changed and I had to relearn how my body works, and like learning how to like figure out how like my attraction was different. And it was like not solely based on attraction anymore. There was the mental aspect, there was the attraction aspect, and then there was like that gut, like those all those things come into more of an important system for me to find a partner or like find any type of like person that I would want to interact with. And so it was interesting when you brought that up. It just like popped up in my head, and for some reason I wanted to share it.
All right, that's beautiful. We'll move on to Lanana.
Nanahid.
Wouldn't it be nice if people educated themselves so that you didn't have to correct them because they didn't assume in the first place, A, what any gender looks like, 'cause that's inappropriate, and there's no B. That's it. Don't assume.
Yep, that's the shortest and like the most direct soundbite that I have selected, because it's just so like direct and just like it all like makes sense. I don't have to really go into too much about it. It's just
No, I think Nana summed it up really well. Yeah, it's
just
like
stands on its own.
And I think that's like kind of what we were talking about, like as social norms and things are changing, times are changing. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode and know that it's not done. Next episode comes out next week. Alexa and I were just so into this and just really just reveling in everything that we have learned and the experiences that I've had an opportunity to learn, she has grown with, and how we have been just really diving into this community. So stay tuned for next week. And if you can't wait, check us out on our Patreon, because it's already going to be up there within the next few days. And remember, if you're not suffering, are you even sending at all?
Drug Tone Audio.